Amina was born in a small village in Africa. She was only 14 years old, yet her life had already been written for her by others. Her father had decided to marry her off to a 50-year-old man in exchange for settling family debts. Her mother wept, trying to protect her, but traditions in their village were unyielding. "This is a girl's destiny," they said. But Amina refused to accept this fate. She wanted to be a teacher, to give other girls a future beyond forced marriage. Yet no one cared about her dreams. That day, as preparations for her wedding began, Amina felt like a prisoner in her own home. She wanted to escape, but where would she go? Tears filled her eyes as she looked up at the night sky. "There has to be a way. There has to be hope," she whispered to herself. Amina sat curled up in the corner of her dark room, silently wiping her tears. From the other side of the house, she could hear her father's voice. The wedding preparations were complete. By morning, she would step into a life from which there was no return. A life as the wife of a man old enough to be her grandfather. Her hands trembled as she covered her face. Her mother lay on the other side of the room, either asleep or pretending to be. Amina had seen the same helplessness in her mother's eyes, but even she couldn't save her. No one could. She took a deep breath. Tonight, she would either escape or be a prisoner for the rest of her life. Once her father and her so-called husband were asleep, Amina slowly got out of bed. Her bare feet pressed against the wooden floor, and her heart pounded so loudly she thought it would give her away. She reached for the door handle and realized her hands were shaking. What if it made a noise? What if they caught her? But she ignored her fear, opened the door, and bolted into the darkness. The night air was freezing. Her bare feet scraped against the hard ground, leaving cuts that stung with every step. She ran as fast as she could, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. She reached the riverbank, her body trembling from exhaustion. But she couldn't stop. Not yet. Not yet. Then a voice pierced the night. "She's running. Stop her." Amina's breath hitched. "They found me." Men from the village were chasing her, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. She considered jumping into the river, but the current was strong. It could carry her away, but going back would be worse than dying. Suppressing the terror rising in her chest, she forced her legs to move faster. Her legs were shaking, her lungs were burning, her feet were bleeding. But she didn't stop. "Get closer! Catch her!" The voices grew louder. Panic surged through her, and in one desperate move, she threw herself to the ground, crawling into the tall grass. Footsteps pounded the earth just a few feet away. Where did she go? She must be here. Search everywhere. Amina pressed a hand over her mouth, muffling her sobs. "If they catch me, they won't spare me. They'll kill me." Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Her heart was pounding so hard, it hurt. Finally, one of the men shouted, "We're wasting time. We'll find her at dawn." As they left, Amina remained frozen in place. She pressed her hands against the dirt, bowed her head, and let out a silent, uncontrollable sob. "God, please help me, please." She didn't move for the rest of the night. When morning came, the moon's pale glow was replaced by the burning red of the sun. Her entire body ached, but she had no time to rest. She forced herself to her feet and kept moving. Dehydrated, starving, terrified, wild animals rustled in the distance. The howling of wolves echoed through the trees. Everything reminded her of death. But she was running from something worse than death. On the first night, her stomach twisted with hunger. On the second night, she drank from a river, only to fall sick because the water was contaminated. On the third night, exhaustion took over, and she collapsed beneath a tree. Her vision blurred, her limbs heavy. Maybe this is it, she thought. Maybe running was useless. Then she opened her eyes, and she made herself a promise. For my freedom, for my future. And that promise kept her alive. Amina had been walking for days, hungry, exhausted, and weak. Her bare feet were torn and blistered, her body aching from the cold nights spent curled beneath trees. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard her father's furious voice and the villagers' shouts chasing her. She cannot escape. The fear never left her. One morning, she spotted a town in the distance. Hope flickered inside her. She tried to run, but her legs barely moved. Her stomach twisted with hunger. People stared, whispering, "Who is this girl? but Amina ignored them. Then she saw it. Oprah Winfrey's Girls Academy. It was real. With her last strength, she reached the entrance before collapsing onto her knees. "I want to learn," she whispered, before slipping into darkness. When she woke up, she was wrapped in blankets, a gentle hand holding hers. "You're safe now," a woman said softly. Tears filled Amina's eyes. "Really?" she whispered. The woman smiled. "Yes, no one can hurt you anymore." Her escape was over, but her journey had just begun. Amina's life changed as she began her education. The moment she held a book in her hands, the letters seemed to glow with promise, each word a gateway to a future she never thought possible. But despite her newfound safety, the past still haunted her. One afternoon, the school director called her into the office. Amina walked in cautiously, but the look on the director's face made her stomach sink. "Your father is here," the woman said gently. Amina felt her heartbeat slam against her ribs. The walls seemed to close in on her. If she went back, her life would be over. Tears burned in her eyes, but before she could speak, the director continued, "You don't have to be afraid. This is a place of learning. Every girl who comes here is protected." Amina turned toward the courtyard. The school gates remained shut. For the first time in her life, someone was standing up for her. She stood there, her breath shaky, watching as her father was forced to leave, his threats and demands powerless against the people who defended her. And in that moment, Amina understood. She was no longer a girl whose fate was decided by others. She was the author of her own story. Years passed. Amina had transformed into a strong, confident woman. Through Oprah Winfrey's women's education initiatives, she had earned a scholarship to study at one of the most prestigious universities in America. She had left behind a past filled with suffering. Yet deep inside, a void remained. One day, she had the opportunity to meet Oprah in person. Sitting face to face with the woman whose initiatives had saved her, Amina shared everything: her escape, her struggles, her passion for education, and the harsh reality that the girls in her village were still trapped in lives of hopelessness. Oprah listened intently, her eyes glistening with emotion. She reached out, gently taking Amina's hand. "Your story will be the hope that so many girls need. But remember, real change starts with you." At that moment, Amina knew exactly what she had to do. She packed her bags. As she sat on the plane, looking out at the vast sky, she thought about the comfortable life she was leaving behind. America had given her safety, knowledge, and opportunities beyond her wildest dreams. But she didn't hesitate for even a second. Her place was in her village. When she stepped foot on the familiar dusty roads, whispers spread through the crowd. "Is that our runaway girl?" People stared in shock. The same traditions still ruled this land. The same expectations bound the girls of her village. But Amina had come back to break that cycle. Taking a deep breath, she stood tall and spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. "No girl will be forced into marriage again. Every girl here deserves an education, just like I did." Silence fell over the village. Some elders frowned. But then, one by one, young girls began stepping forward. First a few, then more, then a crowd. That day, a spark was lit. Amina was no longer just a survivor. She was a beacon of change, a force that would reshape the future, not just for herself, but for every girl who had ever been told she had no choice.